There were places in the American frontier that maps marked, but men forgot, and Carrion Bluff was one of them. Nestled between scorched canyons and endless, brittle plains where the wind carried the dry scent of mesquite and bone dust, it sat like a rotten tooth in a dying jaw. The sun baked the land until the earth cracked, and the horizon shimmered like a false promise of water that never came. The town itself was little more than a sagging saloon, a crumbling general store, a livery stable, and a crooked line of weather-beaten shanties. The church bell had long since rusted silent, and the sheriff's star hung useless on a cracked beam in the abandoned jailhouse. Out here, law had no voice. Only Judson Cade did. Cade wasn't a man so much as a shadow with a pulse, tall, lean, eyes like burnt coals, and a mouth that rarely smiled except when something was breaking. He and his gang of roughnecks ruled Carrion Bluff, like wolves over a starving flock. Extortion was their trade, violence their pastime. They bled the townsfolk dry for whiskey, women, and whatever scraps of dignity could still be wrung from tired hands. Folks learned to keep their heads low, to say yes sir, even when no one was speaking, and to turn away when something ugly was happening, which was often. And so it was no surprise when no one said a word about the girl. She'd appeared one morning behind the saloon, curled up in an old shipping crate lined with dead chicken feathers. No one knew where she came from. Maybe no one wanted to. Her dress was ragged, her hair a tangle of dirt and dried blood, and her face smudged and hollow-eyed like a child grown old too fast. The only sound she made was the brittle rasp of her breath. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just watched, silent and feral, like a half-starved animal waiting to be struck. The townsfolk gave her wide berth, not out of pity, but out of fear. It wasn't the girl they were afraid of. It was the men who'd likely left her there. A pair of Judson's boys, Wren and Cal Bixby, spotted her by the stable that afternoon. The Bixby brothers were the kind of men who took pleasure in small cruelties. They called her names, nudged her with the tips of their boots, and laughed when she wouldn't flinch. "Look at this one," Cal jeered. "Ain't she a sight? Think she can fetch? Or maybe she's good for a round with the hogs." Wren spat a gob of tobacco-stained phlegm near her head. "Bet she don't bleed no more neither. Ain't worth the bullet." She didn't react. Not even a twitch. That was when Bo Thatcher happened by. Bo Thatcher was a relic of a man tall, raw-boned, with a face like sun-bleached leather and eyes the color of storm clouds over dry land. Folks said he was once a scout for the cavalry, a sharpshooter without equal. That was before the raid, before the fire that took his family and left his soul a hollowed-out shell. He'd lived alone out in Dust Hollow ever since, speaking to no one, answering no calls for help. Some said he was mad. Others said he was dead already, walking only because the earth wouldn't take him. But he saw the girl, saw the purple bruises blooming on her thin arms, the split lip, the way she didn't even cower when the boot came near. And something old and ugly stirred in him, not pity, not anger, something deeper, something forgotten. He stepped off the boardwalk and crossed the dusty road, the spurs on his boots rasping like dry leaves. The Bixby brothers saw him coming, and their laughter faltered. "Well, if it ain't old Thatcher," Cal smirked, trying to summon his usual sneer. "Don't reckon this one's yours. Bo, move along." Bo didn't stop. "Mind your step there, old man," Wren added, hand straying toward the pistol on his hip. Bo halted a foot from them, his weathered face unreadable. He looked down at the girl, then back at the Bixbys, and then something in his gaze, not fire, but a cold, leaden certainty, made Wren's fingers freeze where they hovered. The street stilled. The saloon doors creaked on their hinges. A dog slunk behind a trough. Folks peered from behind curtains, the way they did whenever Cade's men itched for blood. But this time, there was no Cade, only Thatcher. In a voice like gravel dragged across stone, Bo spoke. "She eats with me now." Simple words. No shout, no threat. Just a flat, final statement. Like it had already happened. Wren swallowed hard, his bravado cracking. Cal gave a nervous snort of laughter that sounded too loud in the quiet street. "Ain't our trouble anyhow," he muttered. "You take her, old man. Filthy little thing." And they left. Not because they feared Thatcher's gun, though they should have, but because something in his stillness warned of storms best left uncalled. The town stayed silent as Bo crouched beside the girl. She didn't shrink away, didn't meet his gaze, but he saw the way her fingers twitched toward the hem of his coat, like testing if solid things still existed in this world. Without another word, he lifted her into his arms. She weighed less than a sack of oats, and the town of Carrion Bluff watched them go, saying nothing, doing nothing, as they always had. The ride out to Dust Hollow was long and quiet. The girl, Mabry, though Thatcher didn't know her name yet, sat before him in the saddle, light as driftwood, her bony shoulders tense beneath the tattered cloth of her dress. She didn't speak, didn't glance back at the town shrinking behind them, and Thatcher didn't press her. Out here, the land spoke enough for both of them. Dust Hollow wasn't a place so much as a wide stretch of brittle, sun-baked scrubland broken by stands of sagebrush and mesquite. Rust-colored mesas loomed in the distance like ancient sentinels, their jagged crowns catching the last light of day. The trails that led there had long since faded, remembered only by the few who cared to follow them. Coyotes cried in the distance as dusk settled, their mournful howls rising against the wind. It was the kind of country that kept its secrets buried deep, and its dead deeper still. Thatcher's ranch was a squat, weather-beaten house with a sloping roof, a corral leaning on its last posts, and a barn that listed like an old drunk against the dying sky. He dismounted, lifted the girl down, and carried her inside. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and old leather. A single rifle hung above the hearth, a reminder of days when it had been used for more than coyotes and rattlers. He sat her at the table and lit a lantern. The flickering light caught the sharp angles of her face, the smudges of dirt, and the bruises half hidden beneath her hair. She stared at the table, hands in her lap, like she wasn't sure if she was supposed to vanish. Thatcher set a plate of stew before her, thick with beans and leftover rabbit. She didn't move. He crouched beside her, voice low. "Eat. Ain't no one gonna take it from you here." No answer. He left her be, sat across the table, and watched her from under the brim of his hat. It took a long while, but eventually, her fingers crept toward the spoon. She shoveled the food in quick, furtive bites, like someone who knew what it meant to go hungry too long. Later, Thatcher showed her to a small room off the main room. The bed was narrow, the mattress thin and sagging, but it was clean. She hesitated at the threshold, eyes wary. He left the door open, pulled a quilt from the chest, and settled it over her. As he turned to leave, he caught a glint around her neck, a small, tarnished locket on a frayed leather cord. The silver was dulled, but he recognized the engraved letters, MT. A cold knot formed in his chest. Mary Thatcher, his sister's initials. He said nothing, made no move toward it, just stepped out and shut the door. That night, he sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Faces swam in the flicker. The boy with hair like wheat, the woman with soft eyes and a hand that always smelled of lavender. His wife, his son, both gone, cut down by Judson Cade's riders 5 years before. His sister and her family too, burned out of their homestead, bodies left for the buzzards. He hadn't fought them. Not then. Not when it counted. Guilt was a hard thing. It didn't howl or haunt a man in dreams. It just hung on his bones like old, wet wool, heavy and clinging. At dawn, he found Mabry in the yard. She'd washed herself in the water trough, hair still damp and tangled. He brought out bread and jerky, set it on the fence rail, and motioned for her to eat. She obeyed, watching him like a caged animal measuring the space between them. In the following days, he noticed things. The way she moved silent as smoke, how she crouched to study tracks in the dirt, a rabbit, a snake, a man. She'd sharpened one of his skinning knives without being shown, the blade honed to a razor's edge, and she kept to the shadows, vanishing when strangers passed on the distant trail. She wasn't just feral. She was taught. Thatcher tested her with small lessons, showed her how to check a snare, how to saddle a horse without spooking it. She picked it up quicker than any boy he'd known. When he handed her a rifle, she hefted it like she'd held one before, sighting down the barrel without flinching. He spoke little, but words weren't needed in a place like Dust Hollow. There were other ways to talk. The way a man left a knife sharpened on a stone. The way a quilt was folded neat at the foot of a bed. The way food appeared on a rail fence without comment. Some nights, they sat by the fire, sharing bread and silence. Coyotes sang in the distance, and the wind rattled the dead branches of the cottonwoods. It was a kind of peace, sharp-edged and narrow, but peace nonetheless. Mabry never spoke, not a word, but one evening as the last light drained from the sky, she brought Thatcher a sprig of desert sage, its tiny purple flowers clutched in a grubby fist. She left it by his plate and walked away. And Thatcher, who hadn't believed in much since the fire, felt something shift in his chest. A small thing, but it was there. In the land where nothing grew but dust and bones, two broken things had found each other, and though neither could name it, a bond was forming in the stillness between the mesas and the howls of the dark. Word spread faster than wildfire on a dry wind. By the time dusk settled over Carrion Bluff, every man, woman, and child with ears to hear knew both Thatcher had taken a stray girl out of town under the noses of Judson Cade's men, and by nightfall it reached Cade himself. Judson Cade sat in his usual corner of the dust-raven saloon, a bottle of rye sweating beside his elbow, one boot propped on a crate of ammunition, the other tapping a slow rhythm on the floor. The lamplight caught the jagged scar on his neck, a memento from some forgotten knife fight, and his eyes, dark as tar pits, fixed on nothing and everything at once. Wren Bixby delivered the news, head down, voice tight. That old bastard took the girl, Judd. Didn't ask. Just up and claimed her. For a moment, the only sound was the off-key tinkle of the saloon's piano, a tune so worn and mournful it might have been a hymn for the dead. Then Cade leaned forward, resting forearms on his knees, a slow grin curling the corner of his mouth. "Well now," he murmured, savoring the taste of the words. "Ain't heard that name a while. Bleeding Bo Thatcher." Wren paled. He'd heard the stories, every man in Carrion Bluff had, about the sharpshooter who rode with the cavalry scouts, the one who could drop a rider at a quarter-mile, who left blood in his wake like a butcher. Thought he'd drunk himself into a grave years ago. Cade wasn't smiling anymore. "I want him found," he snapped, "and I want a reason to drag him out by the boots." By morning, his men fanned through the streets, shaking down shopkeepers, leaning on stable hands, and spitting threats at anyone dumb enough to meet their eyes. The tension thickened like storm clouds. Every porch creaked, and wind gusted sharp with the scent of gun oil and fear. No one spoke Thatcher's name out loud, but it hung there in the air, heavy as the heat. At Dust Hollow, both Thatcher felt it coming. He always knew when death was in the wind. He saddled his horse before sunrise, eyes scanning the horizon where the mesas bled red into the sky. Mabry stood by the doorway, the old locket still at her throat, her face unreadable. "You stay here," Thatcher said, tightening the cinch. "Don't open the door for no one but me." She nodded, small fingers curling around the Winchester he'd left loaded by the hearth. He didn't want to go into Carrion Bluff, but supplies were thin, and he'd rather face it than send her. The town would swallow a girl like Mabry whole if it got the chance. The ride was uneventful, but the moment his boots hit the ground on Main Street, he felt the weight of 100 wary stares, faces peeking from behind curtains, men leaning too casually on doorframes. The piano in the saloon clanged out a brittle, broken tune, keys missing notes like teeth in a gambler's grin. Thatcher walked to the general store, his stride steady, unhurried, though his pulse tapped a grim cadence behind his ribs. Inside, the air was thick with dust and tension. The storekeep, Ezra Cole, pretended to tally goods, but his hand shook, and two of Cade's men leaned by the barrels of dried beans, their smirks oily. "Well now," one drawled, Ben Cragg, a pig-eyed thug with a scar across his knuckles. "Ain't it a surprise? Thought you were dead in that hollow of yours, Thatcher." Bo said nothing, selecting a sack of flour, a coil of rope. He could feel the trap set around him, the open street beyond the door, Cragg's fingers grazing the butt of his revolver, the way the townsfolk scattered like dry leaves in the wind. "You come to town to stock up for your little stray?" Cragg pressed, voice low and sharp. "Cade's got interest in that one." Thatcher met his gaze, calm as a mill pond. though the storm roiled just beneath. "Ain't your concern. Everything here's Judd Cade's concern." A voice from the corner spoke up, raspy and cracked like a dry well. An old prospector, Elias Crow, a man who rarely spoke, but when he did, folks listened. "Funny how past ghosts don't stay buried long," Elias rasped, eyes gleaming under the brim of a battered hat. "Ain't it, Bo? Reckon this town forgot what happened up at Bitter Creek, but some of us ain't." Thatcher stilled. Bitter Creek. The words were a snakebite to the gut, a memory long buried. Men in the dark, torchlight against timber, a night that left blood in the dust and a family in ashes, and a betrayal, one that wore Cade's face. Cragg snorted. "Old man's been drinking loco weed again." But Thatcher was already moving, paying for his goods, eyes never leaving the street as he stepped back outside. He didn't need a calendar to know the hour was closing in. That night, under a sky slick with stars, Mabry spoke for the first time. They sat by the fire, the flames low and flickering. Thatcher cleaned his rifle, watching the shadows stretch long across the dirt yard. "I remember," she said softly, voice rough from disuse. Thatcher's hand froze. "I remember the men," she whispered. "The one with the scar. Judson's Mark. They came, they killed Mama and Pa, left me in the crate." Her eyes gleamed, but no tears fell. "I saw you once," she added, looking at him. "When I was little. Mama said you'd come for us someday." Thatcher felt his throat tighten. The Lockett's initials, his sister's face behind his eyes. "I should have come sooner," he said, voice barely a rasp. They didn't need to say what came next. It hung between them like the scent of rain on dry earth. There were debts long owed in Carrion Bluff, and soon they'd be paid. The night before the storm, the world felt too still. A dry wind rattled the branches of the scrub oaks around Dust Hollow, and the coyotes howled long and low in the distance, as though mourning something not yet dead. The moon hung like a sickle in the sky, pale and sharp, bathing the brittle earth in a cold, silver glow. Inside the weather-beaten cabin, Bo Thatcher laid out his rifles, revolvers, and knives on the table, oiling each with care, his hand steady, though his pulse beat a grim rhythm in his ears. He'd known this would come. Men like Judson Cade didn't let defiance stand. Blood called to blood, and the past had a way of dragging itself out of its shallow grave. Across the room, Mabry worked in silence, packing cartridges into loops on an old leather belt. The rifle he'd given her, a long-barreled Winchester, heavy for her frame, leaned against the wall, but she moved like someone born to the weight of it. In the days since she'd spoken, her presence had changed. The hollow, haunted look in her eyes remained, but now it was sharpened, tempered into something clear and cold. They'd spent the afternoon setting traps along the narrow trails into Dust Hollow. Thatcher had shown her how to rig tripwires to loosen rocks on the canyon ridge, how to bury sharp stakes in a gully path, and how to position themselves so the land became their ally. The place was made for it, the gullies, the narrow cuts between boulders, the dry stream bed that curved back behind the barn. As the last light faded, Thatcher took a scrap of canvas and scrawled a message in rough letters with charcoal from the fire. "Cade, come and take her." He nailed it to the post at the entrance to the hollow, knowing word would reach Cade before dawn. It was a taunt, a challenge, and a promise. That night, Mabry insisted on taking first watch. Thatcher handed her the rifle, adjusted the sights. "You see any shape that don't belong, you wake me. No hero work, understand?" She nodded. The hours stretched thin. The coyotes called again, nearer now. Dust rode the wind, hissing through the sage. Thatcher drifted between sleep and memory. The crackle of flames, a woman's scream, a boy's laughter cut short. He saw his sister's face, her eyes the same storm gray as Mabry's. When he woke, just before dawn, Mabry was still at her post, the rifle steady across her lap, her silhouette stiff against the paling sky. "You see him?" he asked quietly. She nodded once, chin tilting toward the eastern trail. "Dust. 10, maybe more." Thatcher squinted. She was right. A low haze rising above the plain. Hoofbeats faint but steady. Time then. They took their positions. Thatcher up on the ridge, where gnarled juniper gave cover, his Sharp's rifle laid across a flat rock. Mabry in the loft of the barn, the Winchester's barrel poking through a slat in the boards. The sun cracked the horizon, turning the mesas blood red, and with it came Judson Cade. He rode at the head of a dozen men, all armed to the teeth, dust masking their faces, but Thatcher would have known them by the way they sat their saddles. Killers, every one. Cade himself rode a black gelding, his hat pulled low, a long coat trailing like a crow's wings. A rifle rested across his pommel. They slowed at the mouth of Dust Hollow, reading the message Thatcher had left. "Cocky old bastard," Cade muttered. He raised a hand. His men spread out. Thatcher's world narrowed to the ring of the rifle stock against his shoulder, the crosshairs resting on the nearest man, a wiry, sneering thug named Eli Grant. He let the others move a little farther, waited for the light to hit just right, then fired. The shot cracked the morning, and Eli's head snapped back, body toppling like a puppet with its strings cut. Chaos followed. Cade's men scattered, firing blindly toward the ridge. Dust and gun smoke blurred the air. Thatcher moved like a phantom, dropping down behind cover, lining up another shot. Two more fell before they reached the first set of traps. Wren Bixby's horse stumbled into a snare, the creature shrieking as a branch snapped upward, driving a stake clean through the rider's thigh. His screams echoed off the canyon walls before a second bullet ended them. From the barn loft, Mabry's rifle cracked. A rider spun out of the saddle, hit the dirt, and didn't rise. She worked a lever action like someone born to it, expression stone cold. Judson's men faltered. This wasn't a scrap with a drunk farmer. This was a reckoning. "Fan out!" Cade bellowed. "Flush him out!" But the land betrayed them. Another man fell into a pit lined with sharpened stakes. A third took a round to the chest, the force of it throwing him off his mount. Judson gritted his teeth, blood boiling. He saw a shadow move in the barn, took aim. A shot fired. The round grazed Thatcher's arm, tearing a red line through flesh. He grunted but didn't stop. The fight stretched long, a brutal dance of gunfire and dust, blood spattering dry earth. One by one, Cade's men died. Some by bullet, some by trap, others by the sheer terror of a ghost they thought long dead. When only two of his men remained, Cade dismounted. He moved toward the house, rifle raised. Thatcher stepped from cover, blood on his sleeve, revolver in hand. "Cade," he called. The outlaw grinned, teeth white against the grime of his face. "Well now, Bo. I figured you'd stay in your hole." "Figured wrong. You always did." They circled one another, steps crunching over bloody dirt. "Funny thing," Cade mused. "You left him to burn. Your kin. Ran like a dog." Thatcher's jaw clenched. "Whole time," Cade went on, "I figured that little one didn't make it. But here she is." He cast a glance toward the barn. "Spitting image of your sister." Thatcher's grip tightened on the revolver. "You killed them." "Yeah, and I'll finish what I started." A shot rang out, not from Thatcher, from the barn loft. The bullet caught Cade square in the chest, the force of it staggering him. He looked down, eyes wide as blood bloomed through his coat. He dropped to his knees. Mabry stood in the loft, rifle steady, smoke rising from the barrel. Thatcher crossed the space between them as Cade struggled to breathe, kneeling beside him. "I should have done this years ago." Cade coughed, tried to speak, but no words came. Then he was still. The dust settled. Silence fell. Thatcher looked up at Mabry, something breaking in his chest. "You knew," he said hoarsely. She nodded. "I saw your face that night," she whispered. "Mama told me you'd come." Thatcher's eyes stung, and he reached up to touch the locket around her throat. "Your mother was my sister," he said softly. "You're my blood." "I know." No more words passed between them. None were needed. The hollow was theirs now, and Carrion Bluff would remember the price paid in blood and dust. The news of Judson Cade's death spread through Carrion Bluff like a long-awaited rainstorm over parched earth. In a town where men had learned to keep their eyes down and their voices low, something broke loose in the days that followed. The hard, brittle silence that had gripped the streets cracked, and a cautious kind of life returned. For the first time in years, the saloon doors swung open without fear. The battered church bell, untouched since the last marshal vanished, told once more. Folks spoke in hushed tones about what had happened out at Dust Hollow, about the bloody trail, the dead men, and the final reckoning. But it wasn't just Judson Cade they spoke of. They spoke of Beau Thatcher. Some swore they saw him stride through gun smoke like a man untouched by death, a revenant come to settle old scores. Others claimed it was the girl, no taller than a saddle horn, who felled Cade with a shot that split the dawn. They were both right. A week after the fight, Thatcher rode into town with Mabry at his side. She sat tall in the saddle, a wide-brimmed hat shading her eyes, the old Winchester resting across her lap. Townsfolk watched them pass with a mixture of awe and unease. Men who once turned away now offered curt nods. Women left jars of preserves and bolts of cloth outside the livery, small tokens of thanks. Old Ezra Cole, the storekeeper, ventured to the street as they passed. "Town's yours if you'll have it, Beau," he said gruffly. "We ain't had a man worth the badge since before Cade. You could wear it." But Thatcher shook his head. "Done burying folk in this place," he said quietly. "Time to ride while the trail's clear." And that was the last they saw of him. The two left Carrion Bluff before the sun crested the mesa, dust rising in their wake. No destination spoken, no promise of return, only the open land ahead and the past dead behind them. It's said the frontier forgets most men. It buries them in shallow graves and leaves their names to fade with the wind. Judson Cade would be remembered for a season, as all tyrants are, but his name would wash away with the rains and drift with the dust. But the story of bleeding Beau Thatcher and the girl with the rifle endured. Folks told it around campfires, in saloons, and at trailheads, their faces leaning into the flicker of the flame. They spoke of a man with storm-gray eyes and a scarred heart, and of a girl who never spoke more than needed, whose bullets set a town free. And in the end, the land belonged to them, the kind of people who rode ahead of their legend into the vast, golden sweep of the American frontier, unbroken, bound by blood, and forever remembered.